On a cold night in February, 5 young men inexplicably left the safety of their car and struck out into the woods in the dead of night. It would be months before their bodies were found. Known as America's own Dyatlov Pass incident, we're left wondering what happened to the boys from Yuba City. A nauseating, sickly sweet smell hung in the air as the riders pulled off the main trail and entered the deserted camp. It was early June in 1978, and the late afternoon sun was bathing the stunning Californian wilderness in an iridescent light and warmth. They had been traveling all day and had decided to pull over for a rest and to investigate the curious cluster of abodes tucked away in a cul-de-sac just beyond the tree line. Adorning the mountain road in front of them sat a large trailer, which was surrounded by 4 smaller ones. It was a U.S. Forestry Service station. Its location was not unusual. Many more like it dotted the landscape in this part of the world, strategically placed to help the Forestry Service carry out their duties in all kinds of situations, such as search and rescue or fire spotting. Most of them are staffed, but in the more remote regions, many of them sit on land and are only used when needed, as was the case with this particular camp. The sickly sweet scent was more pungent now that the riders had removed their helmets. A couple of them had recognized it immediately. It was the smell of death. They reasoned that maybe a dead animal was lying close by, rotting in the heat of the afternoon and stinking out the whole area. It was enough to make one of them gag, and they briefly considered leaving. Until one of the men noticed that a window in the larger trailer had been broken and decided to go and investigate. Looking in through the pane of broken glass, he could not see anything of interest. Just a number of cupboards and work surfaces, seemingly untouched. Surprisingly, the door to the trailer was unlocked, and after some deliberation, the rider decided to enter, but nothing could have prepared him for what he discovered inside. Lying on a bed at the rear, under 8 winter blankets and a swarm of blowflies, lay a dead body. What none of the men present that day realized was that they had just stumbled upon what would become a truly heartbreaking enigma, which you, the viewer, have probably never heard of. Authorities en route to the scene already had a hunch regarding the identity of the deceased individual. Upon arrival, their worst fears were confirmed. It was the body of one of 5 young men who had gone missing earlier that year in February. But much of the evidence in front of them just didn't seem to add up. In fact, as the full story unfolded, it would turn out that hardly anything about this case made sense at all. In time, what we would be left with is a thought-provoking mystery, which has come to be known as America's very own Dyatlov Pass incident. With that in mind, we take you back to the very beginning, the early evening of Friday, the 24th of February, 1978. The day had been chillier than usual for the residents of Oroville in Northern California. It was 5:30 p.m., and 25-year-old Gary Dale Mathias was sat at his kitchen table eating dinner. Between gulps of his meatloaf, he looked out of the window at the empty street in front of his house with an eager expression. He must have felt tremendously excited about that night's prospects. For several days, he and a group of friends from the nearby town of Yuba City had been planning to watch a basketball game at California State University in Chico. Even though a light snowfall had been forecast that evening, Mathias assured his mother and stepfather that he would not need his windbreaker since he would be home once the game was over. Earlier that evening, 32-year-old Theodore Earl Weir had come rushing downstairs for dinner, which he consumed at an alarming rate. A few minutes later, he heard the sound of a car pull up outside and honk. Weir instantly rushed out of the door after insisting to his grandmother, Imogen, that he too would not be needing his coat that night. In the driveway, he found Jack and Tom Madruga, 29, sitting behind the wheel of a 1969 Mercury Montego. In the passenger seat sat their friend, Jackie Charles Hewitt, who was 24. Sitting in the back was 27-year-old William Lee Sterling. Weir jumped in the vehicle, and he and his friends set out for Oroville, where they picked up Gary Mathias. From there, they headed out on a 2-hour-long journey toward Chico on what promised to be an eventful evening of sports and cheerful exuberance. Each of them was an avid basketball fan, and they loved to watch both local and televised games whenever they got the chance. They even played as part of a team themselves, the Gateway Gators, and, in fact, had a match set for the very next day, the 25th. The latest in a series of regional tournaments would qualify them for the upcoming Paralympics. They were promised a free trip to Los Angeles if they won the game. An aspect which made this case especially poignant was the fact that all 5 men were either intellectually disabled or suffered from mental health issues. They attended the Yuba City Gateway program, a vocational rehabilitation center where they learned trades while playing on the center's basketball team. Ted Weir was the oldest, yet had the mind of a child. He had a natural friendliness about him, which he often shared with the deeply religious Bill Sterling. At his family's insistence, he had recently quit a job working at a snack bar due to concerns that he was unable to handle the high-pressure workload. Jack Hewitt, on the other hand, was the shortest of the group, standing at 5 feet 9 inches. His head drooped slightly, and he found it difficult to respond clearly in social situations. But when comfortable, he had a natural cheerfulness and got along famously with his friends. Weir and Hewitt were described as inseparable and went almost everywhere together. The older man took protective care of his younger friend and would often make phone calls on his behalf. Jack Madruga had graduated high school and served in the Army in Vietnam but was discharged after a medical evaluation. Although not diagnosed as intellectually disabled, he was generally considered slow by his acquaintances. Despite this, Madruga was competent enough to possess a state driver's license and loved driving his cherished Montego almost as much as he loved playing basketball. Like Madruga, Gary Mathias had also enlisted in the Army and had been stationed in West Germany. Following a drug-related breakdown in 1973, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and honorably discharged. For this reason, he had been taking prescribed medication for nearly 5 years. In that time, his condition had improved greatly, and he had even managed to hold down a job working for his stepfather's landscape gardening service. Finally, completing the group was Bill Sterling. Like Ted, he also had the mind of a child and rarely left the house for anything other than church, basketball, or attending the program. Ted would often phone Bill to read him bizarre newspaper articles or repeat amusing names found in the phone book, which both of them found highly amusing. Sterling also devoted time at the local hospital, reading Bible verses to patients on the wards.